Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Colin Demuth, and it is right at the top of the hour. We've got a number of attendees still joining, so we're going to wait about 1 minute and then get started, so we're not waiting too long. If you have any questions, though, please feel free to, up on the top left-hand side of your screen in the attendee chat section, if you have any initial questions about the platform or what you might like to see, go ahead and drop them in there now, and maybe even tell us where you're from. That'd be great. Hey, Daryl, good to see you. Good to hear from you anyway. Thanks for using the chat function over there. Mary Lou, thanks for joining us from Florida. Okay, it is 1 minute after, and I don't want to keep anybody waiting because we've got a lot of great content to cover today. Everyone's joining in now. Hi, Amelia, Jessica, Catherine. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. It's great to have you on. So my name is Colin Demuth. I'm the Director of Product Marketing with mLevel, and I have with me today Clinton Sorrell, our Customer Success Manager extraordinaire. And we're kind of taking a 90-degree turn from our typical expert webinar series because we got really inundated with a lot of requests for, showing mLevel's platform and the power of it. And so that's what we decided to do is add another webinar this month. We just finished up with Bob Mosher with Applied Synergies, who did an extremely insightful webinar on the 70-20-10 methodology. And you can just, if you want to review that plus his slides, I highly encourage it. You can go to our website under mlevel.com/webinars, or just go to the main page and go under resources and find that content. But it's great stuff. And next month, we've got Roberta Gagos with Star Conspiracy, and she's going to be talking about the future of learning technology. So if you're a buyer or just want to know what's coming up next, you're going to love what Roberta shares with us, and she's got an analyst with Star Conspiracy that's going to be joining us also. So I want to start with a short story, and then I'm going to hand the reins over to Clinton because he's really got the great stuff this afternoon. So last night I was with my stepson, Logan, and he's 12 years old, and he asked me to help him study for a math test, and it's all about probabilities. And I said, sure, be happy to. And I said, let me see what tools you've got. And luckily, he had some flashcards with a description, a word, and then a definition on the back. And I said, great. So I started quizzing him. And I'd ask him a word, and then he would have to tell me the definition, and I tried it the other way. And after 3 or 4 flashcards, I realized he probably doesn't know anything about the content. Like, he just didn't know any of it. So I said, all right, so Logan, so let's do this. You take 5 minutes, and I want you to review it all, because you may have seen it before, but for some reason it's not connecting right now. I want you to take 5 minutes, review all your flashcards, and then come back, and we'll try it again. He said, okay, so he did that, and we went through the flashcards, and at that time, he remembered about 50% of them. But the ones that he got wrong, I put in a pile, and the ones he was very confident about, I put in a pile, and the ones he was just so-so about, I put in the middle pile. And so I was kind of separating and adapting, what his knowledge levels were. And so as we went back through, even the ones he knew really well, I still repeated those, so he got that good repetition. And the ones he didn't know, after every one that he got correct, I gave him the incorrect. Gave him the ones he got incorrect again, and I give it to him again and again. And after about 2 or 3 minutes, which was really a lot for him, it probably seemed like 45 minutes. I said, all right, I want you to take 5 minutes and go play with the dogs, or go do the dishes, whatever you need to do for 5 minutes, and come back, and we're going to go through this again. And we did that about 3 times, and there were maybe a total of 8 or 9 minutes we spent on these flashcards. But he went from knowing, feeling very unconfident to feeling extremely confident about this test. And he said, hey, I've never learned that way before, but I really have it now, so thank you. And I realized at that point the impact that we have on people's lives. And it's not just about putting content together. It's about, if you really think about how we can impact them and the confidence we can give people as knowledge transfer occurs, I think it makes our jobs completely different. So having said that, just wanted to share that little story from home last night. But a couple of slides. There's an undeniable shift in the world, and Logan, was used to you working on his computer last night, so having paper seemed like a strange thing for him as well. But this undeniable shift going on in the world is that we demand constant learning, and that we want relevant, on-demand content, and we want it in real time. But delivering that is a tough nut to crack. It's not the easiest thing, and there's no silver bullet. You've got to have an integrated solution, because right now there doesn't exist this one all-in-one solution that makes everything happen all at once the way people want it, so we can have the greatest learning impact. So how do we make that happen? Well, Steve Jobs said it best. He said, you've got to start with the customer experience and work back towards the technology, not the other way around. In learning and development, we have 2 unique customers, and those are the leaders and the learners, and we have to satisfy both of them. We've got a tough job, and leaders expect training to match the pace of change within organizations, and change is happening faster than it ever has before. So leaders expect rapid deployment, rapid development, scalable solutions. They even want measurable results, repeatable formula so we can improve ROI, and they want the technology, the accessible technology, to meet learners where they're at everywhere. And that's really what learners want. They expect training to meet them where they're at. They want to push a button and get relevant content that it's not just relevant, but it's engaging. And they want it in bite-sized pieces because they're tired of the fluff. I don't want to watch an hour video with 45 minutes of content that is not going to have any impact on me. And I want it to be interesting. I deserve that. And I want the format to be engaging. And if I'm on my phone or my laptop or desktop, no matter where I'm at, I want to be able to access that data. So it's really a tough job that we have, but we're in an ever-changing connected data-driven world. And so thankfully, there's mLevel. And with that, I want to introduce Clinton Sorrell, who has probably worked with a lot of people who are joined the webinar today. He's an exceptional part of the mLevel team, and he really impacts lives every day, not only internally but with our clients. And he's going to show you how to create an impactful, engaging, microlearning, gamified course we call a mission in just an hour. So I'm going to let Clinton take it away, and we've got a couple of polls that may pop up, so please participate. I think Jordan Fladell, our CEO, is also on the line. So if you've got questions about the platform or something that Clinton's going through, then please just jot it down in the attendee chat, and I'll be listening in and answering questions as well. Clinton, thank you so much for putting all the effort into showing people how to create this mission in 1 hour.
Yeah, thanks, Colin, and thank you for the introduction. Really appreciate everyone joining. Good to see some familiar names as well. Glad that you're not tired of me yet. But like Colin said, the goal for today is just to briefly introduce what an mLevel mission looks like so you have some context, and then go over how we could put the whole thing together very quickly. So what we're looking at right now is an example of an mLevel environment. This is an mLevel demonstration environment, but the way that an mLevel learning program or an mLevel mission works is a learner could access one of these and go through their training in a series of 3 to 5 minute activities to build that retention and build that learning. So what we'll do today is a hypothetical use case. Is one thing a learner might see is maybe they're a new employee at a contact center, and as part of their introductory training, they take an mLevel mission. And so mLevel contains 17 different activities, and some of those activities might range from what we call exposure activities, which include the ability to embed videos, or this activity is called Knowledge Navigator, which is text-based, where a learner could go through here and read the information of typical caller needs, some typical best practices they should understand when working at this company, to what we call anchoring activities, which comprise most mLevel activities. And what anchoring activities are question-based activities where the learner is interacting with the content to build that retention and gain some feedback on what they understand and what they don't. So one example of those is our checkpoint activity, where a learner goes through 3 different levels and they're trying to answer questions correctly to move on to the next level here. So we have multiple choice questions. The learner can answer those. Hopefully I do pretty well considering I put this one together. But they can answer these questions. If they do get them incorrect, so we can do that, then they can receive a hint here. But a typical anchoring activity looks similar to this one. Most of the variety there is in the game-based mechanics or level of game-based mechanics involved. And then the third activity type that we'll look at today is an application style activity that we call Pathfinder, where instead of the learner playing a learning game or a learning activity, they're walked through various scenarios as more of a guided path to give the learner more context when answering questions and to give them more feedback to help build that retention. So the way that Pathfinder works is we create these various scenes where you can use a combination of text or video or imagery to build some context for the learner and then build a branching or linear scenario to teach them that information. What we'll be doing today is going over how I can put those various activities together. And the way that that's done is here in the mLevel studio. So in mLevel, it's a one-stop shop for putting your learning content together. mLevel is available on web browsers, and we have an app on mobile devices as well. You don't have to build those in a separate place or with a separate code base. It all gets done here using just administrator privileges to log into this environment. But sticking with our sample here, maybe after a few weeks of contact center onboarding, one thing that we've noticed is employees are struggling a little bit with recognizing attempts at fraud. So callers are pretending to be someone else, trying to get private information. That's never a good thing. So we need to quickly build a learning program to make sure that our employees understand the various types of fraud that they might encounter, how to recognize those, and then what they should do if they suspect that it's occurring. And so the way that I begin putting that together is here in the mLevel studio. So the first thing I'd want to do is create a new mission. So I could click this new button here and just call my mission Fraud Prevention. And once I do that and click Create Mission, I'm going to land on the mission details screen. What we'll do for the rest of this is really walk through this menu on the left. So in mLevel, we follow a path of picking your specific learning activities that are based on Bloom's taxonomy, really what you're trying to do, whether it's reinforce existing training or launch a new training initiative or provide some pre-work. So you can choose those activities for those various use cases and then quickly add your content and publish that out either to your entire learner base or to specific groups of learners. But the first screen that we have is just our mission details, the bare bones of this mission, where we could change that name if we like. We can change some introductory text as well. And the other thing that's nice about mLevel is when you're adding imagery, it's always done within the flow of the learning, right? So I have a mission cover image. If I come back out here to the learning environment, we can see each of these. Rather than uploading that in a different tab or having to embed it somewhere, I can see the text that a learner will be reading in the context of that image, and I can click this thumbnail icon here, and I just have a folder with some imagery ready for this. So I can just add an image and upload it right to this environment. Some of the other things that you can do, though, on this mission details screen are here in advanced configurations. We won't touch on all of these today, but just a few are, since this is security-based or making sure that we're protecting customer information, it's possible to change the completion requirements. So if you have multiple activities in mLevel, maybe if it's a fun introductory who's who style training, they might not have to get 100% on all of those, so you can lower those requirements. Or in this case, because we're protecting that customer information, we can require our learners to show 100% mastery and prove they understand that information. mLevel also comes with an in-app leaderboard, so you could configure that here as well. And then if we wanted to configure this mission to match company branding guidelines, we could come here to mission branding. Once you use a color, it gets saved, but if it's creating your first mission, or if those branding guidelines change, you can type a hex value into this space or change this color slide here. And then finally, what you're able to do is link to a mission as well. So if you're using mLevel as part of a larger learning program, maybe embedding it in a learning management system, or you just want to quickly communicate it to learners and have them go straight to that training, mLevel generates a specific URL for you where a learner can click this link, and they'll still need to log in, but it would then let them skip this mission selection screen where if they have a large amount of learning programs live, they might be confused about which one they're supposed to take. You can quickly drop them into that learning, save that precious time that makes up their training window, and have them access the content as quickly as possible. And again, what you can see here is we have that URL both for the web browser and the mobile app. You don't have to do anything different to make your mLevel mission mobile responsive or to fit across multiple screens. That just happens as part of the way that mLevel is programmed. But what we'll do next is actually add our activities to this mLevel mission. So mLevel, we have a variety, again, of those exposure activities. For example, those would be our video here that we can add, or the other one that I'll add is that Knowledge Navigator flashcard activity. Then we have the ability to add anchoring activities, those question-based activities to improve retention. And for that, I'll add Block Party, which is one of our more traditional game-based activities, and then assessment, which is a very straightforward learning activity. And finally, we have the ability to allow the learner to apply the information they've gone through in scenarios with that Pathfinder activity. So to add each of those, I can just check those boxes and click Add here. And so we'll see all of these added, and I can drag and drop these to pull them over. For example, if my video is an introduction to the learning materials, I can pull that to the front, and then I can put those flashcards at the end where maybe they go through the information, see what they understand, see what they don't understand, and focus on those pieces of information specifically. And then I can even determine that learning path by locking certain activities. So if I don't want them to play any of those anchoring activities until they go through the video, I can lock Block Party and require them to watch that video first. So I can add that lock here and then configure it. Then within each of these activities, I have the ability to either add some necessary content for those exposure activities. For example, for video, the way that you add videos is I would come to this video tab here, just have a generic file I'll start uploading. But I can begin uploading this video. And this process does take a little while, but what we can do while it goes through its first steps are just run our very first poll. So we'll go ahead and start that. It looks like I have to stop first. Then we will run our first poll of just kind of the biggest pain point that you're running into with your training and development. So we'll go ahead and open that now while the video job starts. Right, and so we've got answers all across the board here, but the video job's done, so we'll go ahead and keep moving, but I'll go ahead and share that vote percentage. Looks like finding that right platform comes up a lot, but then being able to measure the success. So one thing we can make sure to do today as well is go through that mLevel analytics suite and show how this information ends up displaying to you as an administrator to identify those knowledge gaps. We'll go ahead and close the poll. Start sharing again. Colin, if you could just let me know when that appears. So for those exposure activities, perfect. For those exposure activities, we just upload that video within each of these activities as well. So if I wanted to customize Block Party, I could add a subtitle to that. Maybe in this case, because it's fraud prevention, I can say recognizing, just call it recognizing fraud. Adding a little more context of what the learner will be answering questions on. I can turn that activity name off. And again, I can configure those completion requirements, which are entirely mastery-based. What I mean by that is, we'll play Block Party at the end when I publish this activity and this mission, but Block Party requires the user to break sets of blocks, and they earn points for playing that more successfully or clearing more of the board. But even if they're particularly good at the game, they can only earn 3 stars and complete that activity if they get 85% of the questions correct. So again, in our use case, we might want that to be 100, that they recognize all of the different possible fraud attempts that they might see so that they can avoid it happening to them. So I can configure that requirement to be 100% for 3 stars and save that here. We also have the ability to add some more introductory text. The generic text that gets added explains the activity, but you can add some more about the content. And again, we can brand that activity. So I can add another activity image here, maybe just another one of a contact center. And again, I have those colors saved. So if I wanted to match that previous branding, I could pull in that navy blue again, a nice light green, and I could publish those and save those configurations. But once we've chosen which activities we're going to add, the next step is actually putting your content together. And that can be done a few different ways in mLevel. We're going to cover all of them today. But the first one that we'll do is mLevel specific, and it's called the mLevel content grid. So the way that a content grid gets added, I'll go ahead and do that before walking through it, is on this Learning Content tab, you click Add Topics. And a content grid can be created from scratch in the platform, so you have that button here. But the more common way that it's added is you can write it in Excel, which is where I'll walk through it in a second. But we can go and upload that specific grid and start importing our topic here. So while that happens, I'll go to the version of it in Excel and just quickly talk through it, where we're looking at a grid now. So the grid itself is made up of 4 different pieces. The first piece being the topic, which tends to be the title of the grid. Usually in this case, it's fairly straightforward, so I just called it fraud. That's not particularly creative, so what we can do is show how you can edit a grid in the platform to come up with something a little more meaningful. And then we have what we call items, which are your more specific learning objectives that the learner needs to understand in order to show mastery of this entire topic. So they have to know what social engineering is, because that's the most common form of fraud you might see working in a contact center, the various types, so phishing, vishing, ransomware, how they can spot a phishing attack over email, and then what they should do to respond to these incidents if they come across them. The fourth section of the grid is the attribute, which is, I think of it as what I'm going to ask questions about, but it's really the specific kind of characteristics of each learning objective a user needs to understand, right? So they need to know the definition of social engineering, and then within phishing, they need to not only be able to define it, but they have to be able to give those examples. So again, they're kind of more specific tags, or again, more specific learning objectives that fall within these items here, but they can apply to multiple items, right? So there's examples of phishing, and examples of ransomware, or they can be very specific. So the things to look for when you're spotting a phishing attack. So those are our attributes here. And then the final bit is the value, which is the intersection of your item and your attribute. And I tend to think of those as the answers to my questions that my attributes are asking. So my actual examples of phishing are maybe an email from a friend that contains a suspicious link, or an email from a customer asking you to download a suspicious file. An example of ransomware could be that you trick them into thinking they're the subject of an inquiry. So the nice thing about mLevel as well is within these values, you can actually have more than one. So there's many examples of fraud, and I can include each of those here just by separating them with this pipe bar. That will allow the platform to recognize that they're two distinct, or in this case, three distinct pieces of information. And so we'll go into how this actually is used to create questions in a second, but the key pieces to remember just from looking at this chart are the topic is that title, the items are your more specific learning objectives, the attributes are what your learners need to know about your items or what you might ask questions about, and then those values are those very specific pieces of information that can almost be thought of as your answers. So what we'll do, oh, it opened up on another window here, let me pull it back, is I have my grid uploaded, and so again, I clicked add another topic and I chose that file here. But if I wanted to edit that grid, so the name fraud isn't very descriptive, I could click edit knowledge. And I could type in here, I could say maybe recognizing fraud, because this tends to be, or this has covered more of those specific examples that someone might see. So I can change that here without having to re-upload my entire grid. It's nice. If you do recognize a typo, you can change that. For your answers, you can come to additional configuration and make those edits. So even after you upload your grid, you can still make those changes to your content without having to tear your entire mission down or kind of rebuild your content from scratch. You can make those more specific edits. What we can also do on this page is brand our grid. So if I click here for manage images, I can associate images with each of these. That was where in Knowledge Navigator you saw the picture of the contact center employee. I can just add each of those by coming here, clicking imagery, and then maybe for social engineering, I'll use these pictures of computers. And then for phishing, since that's social engineering over the phone, I can do someone speaking on the phone. But again, I can quickly add those images. And I can see the text that they're associated with without having to guess there. And I can do the same as well for that topic or that overall piece of information. But once I've uploaded the grid, the way that this actually gets turned into questions in those anchoring activities is using what we call question templates. And so before going into the template, I'm here on this Game Questions tab. The one thing I'll quickly mention is it is possible in mLevel to just create manual questions. So if you have an existing set of questions, maybe that learners have been taking in an instructor-led session and you need to make those digital and add them to an mLevel activity, or another common use case is the questions have to go through legal review and have to be worded very specifically. Once they've gone through that legal review, you don't have to shoehorn them into a grid. You can just actually add those questions one at a time. And I went ahead and was smart and wrote some in advance. So I could create that question, and I'll just copy and paste it over from a document here. I could write in that question. I can write in my correct answer here. I can write in each of those wrong answers in this space. So sticking with our use case, if you were confirming that someone wasn't committing fraud, what could you ask them for to confirm who they say they are? You can't ask for their password. That's not something they're supposed to give out, but these are those 4 other correct options. And then what you can do is set this to display just an image. Maybe if you have a use case where there's various tools they can use, you can show the logo or a screenshot of each of those tools. or I'm just going to do text only since I don't have an image to associate with any of these. So it is possible if I wanted to just write these manual questions, I could add them in here, but I would have to do that one at a time. The only really important thing to remember that's very different than if you were writing this on a different tool is that mLevel we're also able to show user mastery not just as an overall score, but by topic or by those more specific learning objectives that get laid out here in the content grid. So we'll show how that looks in a second, but basically you could look up how well a person does when answering questions about recognizing examples of phishing and see if they're getting that right more or less often than recognizing examples of these other forms of fraud, and be able to focus on that specific coaching moment with that learner. So for the content grid, that gets done automatically as part of laying this table out since we already have these tags in here. But for manual questions, you do have to tag those here. The nice thing is that since we've already uploaded a grid, we have that example topic, and so we can associate this question in this case with maybe spotting a phishing attack, since it's confirming a customer's identity and making sure that they're not just phishing for that information. So we'll go ahead and tag that question to get some of those topic-based analytics. But once we've done that, I can just click Save, and we'll see that that question saved here. So that's how you would manually add a question, but where the grid comes in to allow you to do that much more quickly and without having to create those tags for each question is through the use of question templates. So the way that that gets done is if I come here to create a new question template, instead of entering a question manually, I can create a template here, and I'll go ahead and do multiple choice. And I'll use those same terms that we just went over in the grid of the topic, the item, the attribute, and the value to really just tell the platform where to look when putting these questions together. So what we can see here when I go to create a template is I'm defining my content. I can use all of my different items. I can have this grid pulled from every row, or I can make this more specific. So maybe if I just want to, in this activity, have them define the different examples of fraud and then be able to list those examples, I can just select those two specific attributes and relate the questions to those specific pieces of content. Once that's done, again, I'll just use these terms here to write that question out. So what I'll do is clear the generic one, and I'll say, or reword this slightly, select the, and then I can say lowercase attribute, so just to get rid of some of the capitalization that's here, but select the attribute of item. So again, what the platform is going to do here is pull that from my table. So it's going to go to my content grid, and so I've told it to look in these two columns here. And so it'll say, for example, select the definition of, and then it'll choose one of these items and say phishing. And so it'll pull phishing in, and then it'll come across this row and look down this column, and it'll find that match, and it'll recognize that this value is the correct answer. Then what you can do is, or then what it will do is it'll look through this column here and use the rest of these as incorrect answer. So it'll use the example of phishing in this case as a wrong answer, or ransomware, excuse me, sorry. And then what you can also do in your grid is add distractors. So these are entirely wrong answers, but those will get mixed in as well. So when we add all of these together here and we tell the platform to look for that information, how it ends up looking is the last thing I need to actually do is define my answers as values. But then if I go to preview questions, we'll see that same example here. So select the definition of phishing. It's pulling that one right answer. That one matching value is the correct answer. And then it's pulling in the rest of these. And so this is a mix, again, of those distractors and those other definitions in the column as those incorrect answers. So the platform is smart enough to match. If I go to examples, we'll see there are two examples of phishing. It knows to display those separately since I separated them with that pipe bar, but it will also know to not show this as a wrong answer for this question. It'll recognize that match, and I've now just with that one template, and by arranging my content in that content grid, I've been able to generate 10 of those questions with relevant wrong answers for each without having to go through those one at a time or think through each of those wrong answers, which tends to be a fairly time-consuming process. So the one other thing I'll do is those forms of fraud typically aren't capitalized. So I'll do that and just make sure this looks all right. Yep. And so then I can just click Save. And what I'll do while this saves is, I know I've been talking a mile a minute here, so we can break for some questions. And I'll pull up the grid too, since some of the questions, or most of the questions tend to be in that area. But Kim or Colin, any questions that we've seen so far?
Nothing coming through. Some people are excited to know that you can make lowercase.
Oh, yeah. That's one of the things. It's in one of our support articles. I'll make sure we add that to the follow-up materials. But the various things that you can do just to make sure that. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. No, I
was going to say the various.
I wonder if you could describe to everybody why, what's the benefit of the grid. It's one of those things, you give, I think it was Abe Lincoln said, you give me 6 hours to chop down a tree and I'll spend the first 5 sharpening my axe. The grid's kind of like sharpening your axe. And then once it's done, you've got this sharpened tool that you can utilize over and over. But I was wondering if you could go through some of the benefits of utilizing a tool like the grid.
Yeah, that's no problem. So the first and kind of most obvious for mLevel example is if you are looking to get those knowledge-based analytics and just see what users understand and what they don't beyond that overall mastery level, the content grid uses those pieces to tag those questions for you. So instead of having to go through and manually tag those to see what users are understanding and what they don't, just by arranging this information, and this is something you typically have to do anyway, right? When you're speaking with an internal client or a subject matter expert, you have to lay out those key learning objectives, those examples of mastery. You can lay each of those out here and then get that tagging to see what they're doing and making sure that they're understanding all of those learning objectives within your program. The second one is that in certain use cases, right, so product training, kind of compliance, or if you're teaching them the various tools as part of onboarding they might want to use. A lot of those tools have very similar functions or very similarly worded answers, where if instead of having to write each of those questions one at a time, which can take hours, what you can just do is if you already have those definitions, you can just quickly upload that grid and write one template and save a good amount of time. One example we had recently is there are groups of sellers at one of our clients who have to learn these various key terms within these different verticals, so common healthcare terms or common financial terms. They were just able to upload the glossary as a content grid and write the template and just show the learner that definition and have them match it to that specific key term as each of these items here. And so they were able to put together a mission where learners were going through those 300 key terms. It was fully branded and fully reviewed and ready to go in 48 hours. So including having the internal client sign off, branding everything out, publishing it, testing it, and making sure it was good to go. It was live and ready for learners in 2 days when they put all of that information together.
Great story, thanks.
No problem. Well, what we'll do then is, I have my question template here, and the other thing that I'll quickly mention is if you did want to move your questions over to a different activity, for example, we have assessment here, I could click Add Existing Questions, and I could pull those over. So here's my templates here. I can pull those over to a different activity. So for example, checkpoint was timed. If your learners think that the time-based aspect doesn't give them what they need to be able to digest that content and understand it and be able to answer it correctly, I could just move my existing questions over to a different activity by clicking this button and checking those boxes. So that can be done very quickly as well. The other thing that I can do specifically within the assessment activity that I just wanted to touch on is most questions in mLevel are text-based, right? So we have our multiple choice questions here. There's also the ability to do multiple correct, so you can have them pick 3 examples of fraud or 3 things that they should do if they suspect fraud. I'm using multiple correct here. But the one that isn't is this image hotspot question. And the way that image hotspot works is I can upload an image here. So we'll go with this screenshot I have. And so what I can do is maybe just say what should I think click would be more accurate here, but what should I click if I come across this screen? And then the learner would see the screen here on the right, and instead of writing in my, my correct and incorrect answers, you can instead highlight a specific hotspot on the screen. So I can use a generic circle, you can use a generic rectangle, which for this, we'll say maybe they have to click network diagnostics. I can do that. Or polygon allows you to check or trace a very specific area just by clicking and tracing those specific points on the screen. So in this case, just to show how that looks, I'll draw kind of a rectangle and then push and pull those points to show how you can manipulate that shape. So this is the one question type that doesn't necessarily have the one right and multiple wrong answers or the true false. You can use this to create a simulation of using a tool or to show them just common reports they might see or common screens they might see and allow them to apply that in a safer scenario of a training environment where they're clicking or tapping on that screen. And then you can provide them feedback. So maybe if they don't tap or click on that correct answer, I can just add some manual feedback that says you I can add that in here, and beyond just telling the learner that they were incorrect, I can give them that extra piece of information. If I wanted to, I could type in Y. There's plenty of room in here to add more information, but just another example of the type of content that you can add to mLevel. So for me, a question just popped up really quickly. Lewis, so the reason that lowercase gets added is if I took that out within my template, I'll pull it out here. So I just have attribute now. So it's going to capitalize that D here in the space. So just kind of from a syntax perspective, or we'll just go with grammar. From a grammatical perspective, that just looks a little inaccurate. So I can fix that by adding that lowercase in. And so you can see the way that that's added for phishing, it just makes it lowercase here. So that's why that gets added. If it's at the beginning of your sentence or if it is just a key term that doesn't need to be made lowercase, then you don't need to add it. So just answering that question quickly. But once we've added these questions into this anchoring environment, the last thing to cover is how Pathfinder is put together. So instead of creating this bucket of questions that goes into the assessment activity or this bucket of questions that goes into the block party activity, the way that Pathfinder works is by creating these various scenes. So if I come here to activities and games, and I come here to Pathfinder, there are 3 different types of scenes in Pathfinder. And they're all structured very similarly. The main difference is in how they end. So a question scene always ends with a question for the learner, and I'm just going to add 2 of those. An ending scene gives the learner a button that allows them to exit the activity. And then a non-answer scene just shows the learner some content. For example, if you have maybe an introductory video or you're just trying to show them some information, without necessarily asking them questions about it, you can embed that in Pathfinder as well. So I'll just add each of these scenes, and again, we can drag and drop these. A nice thing as well, and we'll get into the branching in a second, is you can rename them. So what I'm going to do is show how the branching can be used for remediation. So I'm going to rename this remediation for Q1. But then within each scene, we can add a title slide, we can add a text slide, we can embed images, or we can embed video. So you have that ability within Pathfinder as well. And I'm just going to add text. So I'll clear these two slides out, and then I'll clear this title out. So just as some generic text, maybe so just setting that context for the learner. You can also use this to remind them of some information before they're going in and applying it. A common use case we'll see is you can save PowerPoint decks as a series of images. So you could embed a PowerPoint slide reminding them of some best practices. So you can set that context for the learner before asking them a question. We can also embed a transition image. So I don't think I've used this one yet. I can just upload that image here. But then when I'm writing that question, it's done very similarly to a manual question. So again, I can tag this. Maybe in this case, I'll relate this question to vishing. So then when I write that question itself, I've got these ready to kind of copy and paste over. So my first question, if a customer asks for their password, what should you do? And so the first thing I'll mention is there's this character counter here. You can ask much longer questions in Pathfinder. So again, very useful for creating those more realistic scenarios. Or if you do just have longer questions, you're including some more information for the learner, you can do that in Pathfinder in an easier way to read. But then adding in those incorrect and correct answers, I can add these answer options here. So you have the ability to add your correct answer. Then I can add my incorrect answer. And then there's the ability as well in Pathfinder to have a partially correct answer. So I can add this. Again, I have the ability to add feedback. So maybe if I wanted to just include what the correct answer was, I can add that in here for each of these. But then since this is partially correct, right, this is true, they aren't able to change their password, the customer has to do that themselves. They're not wrong, but they are also correct that they're not able to change that password. So I can give them that partial credit. But then what I can do in Pathfinder is also branch this activity. So you can build a linear Pathfinder where the learner just goes from scene 1 to scene 2 to scene 3. But what you can also do is use this links to option to determine their path using the questions. So maybe if they get this partially correct, I point them to a remediation scene. But if they get this right, then they just move right on to the next question because they understand those materials. So I'll do each of those. And then in my remediation scene, I can just add a quick text slide, maybe just giving them a little more information. You should never set a customer's password without confirming their identity. And that should be done with a confirmation email or having them answer those questions. And then I can link them right onto that next scene and bring them back into that flow. So a very basic example of Pathfinder branching. It is possible to have two totally different scenarios where maybe if you set the customer's password for them, it does turn out that it was fraud, and now you have to address that issue. But if you handled it correctly, then you just move on to assisting them with other common needs. So all that gets done with that drop-down menu. We'll just do kind of another question in the linear flow here, where maybe if there is a case of fraud, how would you report that suspected case? So the incorrect answer, if you only suspect it, would be to call 911, but maybe the right answer is flagging that specific interaction and then informing your manager so they can start that investigation. So we've got our two questions here, and then I'll write in just a generic ending scene. So writing this information, but we've now created these 3 scenes for our learner with a slight branch where if they get question 1 wrong, they get a little more information to make sure they understand the content. But if they get it correct or after they've read that information, they can move on to that next question. So a very brief description of Pathfinder and how that's put together. But those are that's an example of the various types of activities that can be added to mLevel. And so what we'll do now is actually publish this. So the first step for that is mLevel missions can be assigned to various learner groups. So if you have various new hire onboarding classes, you can assign it just to those new hire classes, and existing employees don't need to see that information because they've already learned it. Or maybe if you have maybe a group of managers and the mission is just for leadership, you can have a leadership group for those training courses. And so all of these groups can be created here, or you can assign a mission to everyone in a learning environment. So maybe it's information security. I can have everyone in the company who's able to access this environment be able to access that mission by checking this everyone box. And then the final step is actually publishing these activities. So if I come here and I click these publish buttons, we'll see some of these start. As soon as this is green, this activity is live for either my test group, if I assign it just to a test group in this user group space, or if you're already communicating it to your learners there. But while the rest of those publish, because that normally takes a minute or so, and I'll just move it over here so I can keep an eye on that. We'll just take a quick look at the analytics that are available in some other missions, since that was something that came up in those polls. So where we're at right now, and the way that I got here, is this drop-down menu. And so I chose analytics. Anyone with those administrative credentials can see this information. It's not something you have to really kind of assign extra permissions for or anything like that. You can just add those other pieces of information or add those other learners here to make sure they're able to see that. So what we have first are kind of your standard completion dashboards. I can click on any of these gray bars and see who's played a certain program, so my contact center program, and see who's played it but hasn't necessarily finished it. Then I can click this green bar here to see my one learner who has actually mastered this activity and shown they understand all of that content. Then I can come in here to my engagement tab, and I can see just how many people have played a certain mission, the average number of plays. This is a demo environment, so this chart looks a little different. But I can also see those total plays by activity to understand what people are engaging more or less with. Maybe Block Party gets 3 times as many plays as Checkpoint, so I can keep that in mind in the future to make sure that my learners continue to engage with that information. But where the tagging kicks in are on these knowledge and performance tabs. So this is a different content grid than the one we were looking at, but you can still see those same pieces, right? So we have that topic here, and I can see that 83% of the time users who take this mission get questions right within this specific topic. And then I can drill down and see that they all pretty well understand common customer needs for working with customers across the various mediums. But one thing that they're not understanding, or they only get right 50% of the time, are those best practices over chat. So maybe I need to follow up with my learners about what they should do in that specific instance. And then in the performance tab, I can actually see kind of the number of plays and scores per plays. Again, this is a demo environment, so it's just showing my scores, which is why it's a high variance chart here. But I can also see how often my learners have seen a question, so how many times the question's been answered, and then how often they've gotten it right, but also the wrong answers that have been selected. So I can look here and see maybe users are, maybe this is actually correct and I just need to quickly update my content, or maybe I just need to address a misconception with my population of learners to make sure that they all are on the same page about that specific piece of information outside of the mission. Well, what I'll do now, or Colin, anything else you wanted to mention about analytics before I hop in here to?
No, there was a quick question that I answered about analytics being ported to an application like Domo. So, maybe a quick glance at the export feature.
Oh, sure. So so exporting gives you the ability to pull this information, and what it also does is it lets you see it at an individual level. So, for example, Knowledge was showing that full roll-up of everyone who had answered those questions. I could export kind of those individual learner plays and see that individual learner mastery. You can also use it for completion reporting. You can export it to a learning management system so they're marked as having completed a mission. Or you can see those individual topics that certain learners are struggling with so that you can coach them one-on-one, or maybe send it to a manager a little closer to them so that manager can go over it with them and make sure they know everything they need to know. And so that export gets done here. You can just pick one of those report types which match very closely to the actual dashboards. And then you can download that immediately for a certain date range, or you can set it up to where it gets emailed to you or dropped into a kind of a secure file transfer. But our actual mission is published here. And so we can see, I've got my little new here, which really just shows I haven't played it. But if I come in here to fraud prevention, welcomes me in. So that's that overview text. And so I can see the order I put these activities in. I can come here to Knowledge Navigator, and I didn't add imagery for all of them, but where I did, I can see that that imagery's been added. I think I left one of these blank. Yeah, so I can see I still need to go add imagery here. I could go do that and republish, and those changes would immediately be live. But I, again, can see those attributes of those things to look for when recognizing fraud, how I can protect myself from phishing. And then within my different activities, I'll go into block party first. So block party, the learner is breaking these groups of blocks. And anytime there's a question mark, you get asked a question to try to complete those specific star requirements and get that question mastery higher. So if I just break this group of blocks here, then I earn those points. But if I break this selection of blocks, then I can actually see the questions that came from my template, right? So select the definition of phishing. So that would be this one. Yep. So I can answer that question here. So it's matching to that specific definition. And so an example of phishing, I'll get this one wrong. So this is one of those true distractors, right? This is a legitimate invitation that you might receive. So it'll recognize that that doesn't match. And so I'll get that question incorrect. And so that's an example of how those templates might look in that game-based environment. But again, just in the interest of time, I won't play all the way through. But if I answered 80% of these questions correctly, regardless of if I cleared the entire board or earned a lot of points, I would only earn those 2 stars. I would need to get all of the questions right in order to earn those 3 stars. But then we can go in here to that Pathfinder activity. So I see that text slide here. So if a customer asks for my password, what should I do? I'll go ahead and get this one partially correct. And so now I'm branched to that next scene. It doesn't really, I could add another scene letting them know I'm getting pulled out of the flow, but you don't have to. You can just move them through like it's kind of the standard or tailor-made for them. And then after reviewing that, I can see my next scene here, answer that question. So I didn't add feedback this time, so I move right on, and I'm finally on that end scene here. So my activity is published. My branding's coming through, my dark blue and my light blue here. All of that imagery is added, and I've published my mission in an hour.
Excellent. Perfect time.
Any other?
You're a hero. You responded to our fraud issue, and now everybody's going to get it right. Nobody's going to click on bad emails or anything.
Yep. Yeah, but
So any questions for
I know we're
Clinton?
short on time, but yeah.
Yeah, great job. So I don't see any questions pop up. I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. It was, Daryl said impressive. It's great. Tim said thank you. Yeah, great job, Clinton, as always. Lots of thank yous coming through. So we will send the recording out if you want to review this again and how we put this together. If you'd like a personalized use case demonstration, please either go to the website and sign up for a demo, or just contact Clinton or myself directly, and we'd be happy to walk you through that. But you will be sent the recording, and please join us next month with Roberta Gagos, who's going to talk about the future of learning technology. So if you want to keep up on what's coming next, then we'll be highlighting that. She's with Star Conspiracy, and she'll also have an analyst with her. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us, and thank you again, Clinton. Exceptional job.
Thanks, and thanks everyone.